the summer of 1403, a rebellion broke out in England that threatened to tear the kingdom apart. There was only one way to resolve it: battle. In these fields north of Shrewsbury, two English armies met, one royal, led in part by a young Prince Hal, and one rebel, led by Henry Percy, known as Hotspur. At the Battle of Shrewsbury, England's future was decided. The lessons learned by Hal, the Prince of Wales, from the Battle of Shrewsbury would in no small part lead to his famous triumph at Agincourt. But it was also during the Battle of Shrewsbury that Hal suffered a life-threatening wound. He was struck in the face with an arrow. As the heir to the throne, saving the prince's life was paramount. After the battle, the ailing prince was taken to Kenilworth Castle, the nearest royal seat. It was here that he was looked at by a number of physicians until finally the royal surgeon, John Bradmore, took over the prince's care. I'm meeting James Wright, who's extensively researched what happened to Hal after the battle and can show us just how Bradmore went about saving the prince's life. So James, Prince Hal takes a massive wound at the Battle of Shrewsbury.
He does. He gets an arrow in the face.
What do we know about it?
Quite a lot, actually, because the surgeon that treated him afterwards, John Bradmore, was kind enough to leave a full account of the operation. So he takes us through the entire journey step by step.
So what do we know about the depth of this wound?
We know that it was 6 inches deep. Bradmore makes that very, very clear. There has been a little bit of debate whether it was on the left or the right-hand side of his face.
Okay.
Bradmore says on his left side. However, if you were to look at later portraits, it does show his left side very, very clearly. There is no scar. Now, you could argue, is that just, the artist flattering the king? Or is it possible that he is hiding the scar and it's actually on the other side, and simply, when Bradmore describes it, he's saying his left rather than the prince's?
So 6 inches deep, that is a horrific, horrific wound.
It is indeed. He was phenomenally lucky. Everything about that strike was perfect. If somebody said to me, I'm going to shoot you in the face with an arrow, you've got no choice in the matter, I'd want to be hit the way he was. Everything was right about it. The angle was right. It was coming in at not too high a speed that it didn't go straight through the back of his head. The type of arrowhead that was being used. And if you look at the types of things that he might have got, he could have got something like that, which would have been pretty horrific.
Very broad, really going to make a huge wide wound.
Absolutely. Instead, he gets one of these.
I see.
Which, it's not great, but it isn't going to mean it's going to be a little bit easier to get out.
So it's a little bit narrower of a wound, and
it's
that's
a little bit narrower, yeah. Now, he knows he's going to have a problem because normally these are only fixed onto the shaft using beeswax. The idea being, if you try just yanking the arrow out, you're going to leave the head behind. And it's for that reason that most surgeons, if they were faced with a penetrating wound like that, they would push the arrow all the way through, take the head off, and pull it back again and just sew at both ends. You're actually doing less damage that way.
Right.
With this pushing against the prince's spine, that's not an option.
That's not an option at all. We have reports from Bradmore about him worried about seizures, which helps us know how close that is to the spinal column.
It was very, very close, yeah.
So any mistake, any this way, that way, in further, the prince is gone.
And I think that's why he didn't leave it there. Another surgeon might have left the arrowhead in place and just allow it to heal up around him. He was aware that all that had to happen was that arrowhead shift ever so slightly. The prince could drop dead a month, a year, 10 years from now.
So now Shakespeare says this is a shallow scratch, is what he has Hal say.
Yeah.
This is not a shallow scratch.
This is not a shallow scratch. We can demonstrate exactly how not shallow this is.
Okay.
So this is going to be the prince for the day.
Okay.
So apologies, Your Highness. And if we can just get a nice demonstration of just roughly about there, and we're just going to give that a nice shove in, going down about 6 inches.
Oh.
That feels about right.
Oh, the poor man.
And to his credit, this kid, he was 16 years old, kept fighting for nearly half an hour with this thing sticking out of his face.
Do you think there's any chance maybe he just, in the shock of it, pulled?
Quite possibly. It doesn't say exactly at what point the shaft was removed, but we do know that when it was removed,
oh God,
he's going to leave something behind.
Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. And this
That
is
is a problem.
Bradmore's problem.
This is
He's
Bradmore's problem.
pulled the shaft, the arrowhead is still left in there and lodged against his spine.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about what he came up with, because he realizes I've got to, first widen this wound.
Absolutely. Part of the problem he's got is that the flesh will be closing in around the arrowhead, so he has to give himself more room to work.
Because the tissues have all just gone in.
Absolutely. Now, I think probably one of the best ways to demonstrate this would be to use a little sample of ballistic gel here.
All right.
So I'm just going to take another arrowhead, and we're just going to push this in about the same distance there.
You can see the force that you're having to use
to
get this in.
You can just imagine just like the speed that these arrows would be moving at. That's about right there. So I'm just going to give that a yank, and sure enough, there we go. We've left the arrowhead behind.
And you can see so clearly here how the ballistics gel has sucked in around that wound. It's closed it, which is what the body's supposed to do,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
We want to close off so we don't bleed out. But that's what Bradmore's problem is.
That's Bradmore's problem. So his approach to this was to create what he called tents.
Tents.
So
now, I've camped in a tent. This doesn't look like a tent.
No, it's not. This was his word for it, and it's essentially pith of elder, which does have some antibiotic properties, wrapped very tightly in linen, and then he would have dipped it in honey and rose water, which would have been an antiseptic. He wouldn't necessarily understand the mechanism, but he knows that that works. It prevents infections. So he's going to start off with quite a thin one, and what he's going to do is just very carefully ease that down. And you imagine he's doing this all by feel, of course, and we can see through the ballistic gel, he can't.
And this is several days after he's taken the wound, so it's this much more important that he open it up again.
Absolutely. So brings that out, and then we're just going to consider using wider ones.
And he would put these in and leave them in there for a little while and then pull them out?
Yeah, just widening it out a little bit. He's just giving himself that little bit more room to work with without doing much collateral damage around the area.
Now, as this whole time that he's doing this, the prince has got to be in agony.
I think the prince had an incredibly high pain threshold.
He did.
He had to. The fact that he kept fighting for something like half an hour with the arrow still sticking out of his face before he'd allow his men to drag him off the field, you know, that is a serious tolerance to pain. When Bradmore's performing this entire procedure, Hal has to stay so incredibly still so he doesn't aggravate the wound.
Now, do we think he's got some medications?
It's probable. Bradmore doesn't specify. He doesn't say that he puts the prince under anything. I think the most likely thing they would have done is something akin to Dwale. They wouldn't have used alcohol.
Okay.
So the trouble with using alcohol is while it may knock you out, it also thins the blood down, which means if you're performing surgery, your patient bleeds out quicker.
We don't want that. We don't want that, no.
What you're going to get is a mixture of white wine vinegar, lettuce juice, henbane, hemlock, opium, and betony.
That sounds hideous.
If it doesn't kill you, it is a really effective anaesthetic.
So Bradmore's balancing a lot of things here. He's
Yeah.
balancing the wound. He's also balancing this medication. If he gets that wrong, he kills
Yeah.
him. If anything goes wrong here, his patient is going to die. And that's
Yeah.
not good for Bradmore.
This is a constitutional crisis. He is feeling an awful lot of pressure on him to get this right.
And is he alone in the room when he's doing this? Is this kind of like we imagine a surgical space?
No, I mean, it probably would have been the prince's bedroom or a similar sort of nice sort of soft space, but certainly not, you know, totally clean. And there would have been plenty of people watching. What Bradmore was doing was very, very unique. People hadn't really seen this type of medical intervention before, so they were naturally curious.
And the curiosity of those in attendance would have been piqued further when Bradmore, after days of attending to the wound, would attempt his extraction of the arrowhead. Amazingly, though, in order to attempt the surgery, he would first need to invent the tool for the job. Luckily for us, Bradmore not only left his incredibly detailed account, he also sketched the tool for us too, meaning we can have a go at an extraction ourselves today.
So essentially he describes long, smooth tongs
Okay.
that have a screw mechanism of some kind inside that would work down the shaft and grip the arrowhead from the inside.
So you need to move the tongs outward to grip from the inside.
Exactly. And I do, as it happens, have a replica that has been made. So,
Look, I've read about these, but I've not seen one like this.
so this works remarkably like a wall plug. So this central shaft, as you can see, it's running down between the tongs, So as you tighten it down, it pushes the tongs apart and allows you to grip the arrowhead from the inside.
And that's part of why you have these grooves on the end, is to have that
Yeah,
grip.
it's just to increase that friction, yes.
Do you think this is actually going to work?
We can give it a go.
Let's give it a go, see if it works.
Okay. So I'm just going to feed that down. If you actually read Bradmore's accounts, he says he's doing it entirely by feel. You know, there's no little electron microscopes or anything like that to sort of eat his way. He's got to just feel his way down there. And he says by his imagination, he's hit that point, which feels about right now. That feels like I'm hitting something solid. And then I'm just going to slowly
You
start
can see
tightening.
as you're doing that, that is getting wider and it's getting that grip on the arrowhead in there. Just hoping the prince doesn't sneeze.
Okay. And then Bradmore describes that once it was in there, he then moved it slightly back and forth,
Oh, you can see it in there. I can't imagine the pain.
and very carefully.
Oh,
And
good
there
job.
we are.
Saved the life of the Prince of
But
Wales.
we're not out of the woods yet.
Oh, we're not?
We've got the arrowhead out,
Okay.
but our biggest enemy now is infection.
Ah, of course, of
So-
course. So what does he do to take care of infection?
So he does not sew the whole thing up as you might be tempted to do. He performs a very interesting technique which is still used today, which is to allow the wound to heal from the bottom up. He cleans it out daily over several weeks, putting in rosewater, turpentine. He's cleaning the wound out, but every time he feeds it down, he's not going quite as far, and he's just allowing the whole thing to heal as it rises to the surface.
And using smaller and smaller tents as he does so. So
Exactly.
it's just all coming up. Quite brilliant. Must have taken a lot of time.
Yes, this would have taken several weeks to heal properly.
Hard to imagine. What does he get in return for this great duty?
In return for this, he gets a royal pardon. So he's not,
needed it?
He needed it. He also gets 10 marks a year for the rest of his life, which would be about 4,000 today. £4,000. That's not a bad earner.
Not bad at all. Not bad at all. And gets his name into history for having done
Does
this.
indeed.
The incredible operation performed by John Bradmore on the future King of England is not only a reminder of the horrific damage inflicted by arrows in battle and the bravery of those who were wounded, but also the ingenuity of surgeons throughout what we often deem an unenlightened age. King Henry V would go on to achieve one of the most famous of English triumphs, a decisive victory at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. Ironically, it would be neither sword nor arrow that eventually ended the king's life, but an illness contracted on the battlefield. For surgeons and doctors to get to the bottom of this, it would take roughly half a millennium and millions of deaths.